And hello once again, my name is Lupus, and today I'm going to be talking about the fallacies of new criticism, aka Anglo-American new criticism. Now, I've already done a video about new criticism in general, in which I also did speak about these fallacies, but I know that some people actually struggle a bit with them on a more individualized level. So, for those who do want them on a more individualized level, we're just going to be talking about the fallacies. That is what we are going to do today. I know, very fun. Now, firstly, if these videos generally help you and what have you, please, you can give them a like, a comment, a subscribe, all the usual fun YouTube things. And if you have any questions, you can always comment and I can see if I can answer them. So, the fallacies. First off, new criticism in general. What is new criticism? New criticism is basically a literary theory that looks at form and content. Those are the major things that it wants to look at. It wants to differentiate literature as a distinct topic of study. Basically, its own, like that literary theory is its own thing that is separate from, philosophy and standard, literature reading, etc., etc. It is distinct from linguistics, it is distinct from philosophy, it's its own thing. So, there are many ways in which they did this, and this is where the fallacies come in. Now, the fallacies, first of all, for those who don't know what a fallacy is basically a thing that is wrong. It's an incorrect thing to do. If you've ever done a course in philosophy, basically the very first things you start to learn about when it comes to how to argue are logical fallacies. These are not logical fallacies. These are specifically fallacies to do with new criticism. But in some sense, you could call them logical fallacies in some or another way. But they're not for argumentation necessarily. But they are things that the new critics say, no, you are not allowed to do these things. You're not allowed to? So, what are these things? We're going to look at three of them. The intentional fallacy, the effective fallacy, and the heresy of paraphrase. Now, also, as someone who has seen a lot of assignments and exams, sometimes people screw up on the intentional fallacy, and for some reason they start talking about the international fallacy, and then they start talking about something random that has nothing to do with literature because they typed it into Google wrong. Intentional is not the same as international. They might look somewhat similar, but they're not the same at all. So remember, the intention, that's what this is, intentional, the intentions of the author. In this case, the intentional fallacy means paying attention to the intentions of the author. So remember, a fallacy is a thing that's bad. So they're saying it's bad if you pay attention to the intentions of the author. So remember, when it comes to a text, say a book, a movie, a game, something, the whole point of literary theory and literary criticism is often to try to understand the meanings and the forms within these texts. So you might say, how can I figure out what the meaning of a text is? Well, do I ask the person that wrote it? The new critics, would say, no. You do not pay attention to what the author thinks their work is about. Authors can lie. Authors might not even have a full picture of their own mental processes. They might not even realize that they put things in subconsciously. You cannot pay attention to the intentions of the author. You need to only pay attention to the text itself. So basically, you only pay attention to the form and content. Form and content, not context. The context would be the author, the society they lived in, the historical period they're from. The new critics say, no, you only pay attention to what is in front of you. You pay attention to the intentions of the author. So you say you don't pay attention to it. You only pay attention to the form and content. So how is it written and what is it about? You only look at the text. Do not look at what the author said. That's the intentional fallacy, right? And it makes complete sense why this would be connected to new criticism. The new critics believed that literature needed to be an autonomous mode of study. They were saying, no, you have to be able to study literature on its own without paying attention to the author, which would go into things like psychoanalysis and psychology of the author. And that isn't part of literature. Going into the historical context in which something was written, that's going into history. That's not paying attention to the text. We only want to pay attention to the text. So that is intentional fallacy. The next one is the affective fallacy. Affective means emotional, basically. So the affective fallacy means paying attention to your emotions as like the analyzer during an analysis. So basically, it's saying you must not pay attention to what you feel about a text. You must only pay attention to what the text actually does, right? So you can't basically, according to them, you can't watch a movie and then say, well, this movie reminds me of my childhood and it feels really nostalgic to me, or something like that, and so therefore I will analyze it in this way. According to the New Critics, if you do that, you're doing analysis wrong. You see, what you should be aiming for is a detached and objective, in quotes, analysis. The reason I put it in quotes is because objectivity doesn't really exist in terms of, most things, but like it doesn't really exist, especially in terms of literature. Different people will interpret literature in different ways. However, the New Critics were saying you can't pay attention to your emotions. You can't pay attention to what it makes you feel. You have to pay attention to what the text itself does. So you're supposed to be unemotional, detached, having this sort of lofty view in which you're looking down upon the literature as a work that must be interrogated and analyzed, and not one that needs to be felt. Now, a lot of people who really love literature will probably think, well, this is an awful way of thinking about it, because isn't it about how it connects with you on a deep level? Now, yes, that is true, but not for analysis, according to the New Critics. Different people will disagree. There are different theories that pay attention more to emotion and what have you. But in this case, they're saying, no. You can like a book. You can love a book. You can explain why you love the book. But that is not a reason to claim that it is amazing for everybody, and it's not a reason to put it into analysis, right? The analysis needs to only be looking at the actual form and content, not at what you feel about it. So you see, that is the affective fallacy. And why does this relate to New Criticism? Well, for the same kind of reasons as the intentional fallacy. They only want to pay attention to the text, the form and the content. They don't want you don't want the intentions of the author in there, and you also don't want the emotions of the reader. You want it to be on its own, detached, objective, specified. That's what you want. You see, that is what makes it more objective in their perspective. Remember, the New Critics want to look at literature as its own mode of sort of analysis. They want it to be its own discipline. And if your emotions are getting in the way, it's not exactly a science then, right? Emotions don't affect science. That's their, argument here. They want to make it a science. The analysis of literature should be its own discipline, its own science. And if your emotions are getting in the way, well, then you're not doing it properly. See, so that is the affective fallacy and how it relates to New Criticism. Lastly, the heresy of paraphrase. Now, it can throw people off because it doesn't have the word fallacy in it. Heresy, now it's actually really interesting that they use the word heresy here. Now, first off, what is a paraphrase? Paraphrase is when you take something and put it into another sort of medium. But usually when we're talking about paraphrasing, it would be like, you read a book, right? And now you're going to explain the book in very, very short. It basically means summarization. It means you put it into different words and you make it smaller. Generally. And a heresy is a religious term. A heresy is basically like a sin. It is something that you shouldn't do. So, if you get the heresy of paraphrase, it's saying like, it's sinful to paraphrase. So, in this case, what is the heresy of paraphrase? Well, it basically means that the full meaning of a text, whatever that text is, cannot be transferred into another format. So you'll never truly be able to understand, like say a book, if it's made into a movie. You won't be able to understand a text if you only take pieces of it. You need to look at the whole thing, which is why they used a method called close reading, where you would pay very, very close attention to the text in its entirety. Now this also, just to make it a little bit also easier, you might think, well, doing a super hardcore close reading of a novel is going to take ages. Yeah, they mostly paid attention to like poetry and maybe a short story or two. They didn't really do the really long stuff, you know. So, yeah. They didn't do that. Anyway, so that is what they're sort of saying here. They're saying, listen, you can't look at this text in another medium. You need to focus on the text in its present form. It's a poem? Cool. You need to focus on it as a poem and look at it for what it is. Don't look at like a summarization of it. You need to look at the text itself. So why does this relate to new criticism? Well, for kind of simple reasons. Once again, the heresy of paraphrase makes complete sense within the context of new criticism because new critics keep on saying you need to pay attention to the form and the content. Don't pay attention to the intentions of the author. Don't pay attention to your emotions. And now also here, don't try and think you can analyze something in a medium other than what it was written in. You need to look at the form and the content of what it is. It's a poem? Cool. Read it as a poem. It is a film? Watch it as a film. Now, they didn't do film, but I'm, extrapolating. So that is basically their whole thing. They're saying you can't transfer it from one medium to another, right? You can't look at your emotions. You can't look at the intentions of the author. All of these things make sense within the context of new criticism. That's why at the very bottom here I have a thing saying, how does this relate to new criticism? I have been doing it as we've been going to make it easier. But remember, new criticism, form and content. That's what it focuses on. It wants to do form and content. It wants to pay attention to just the text itself. It doesn't want to pay attention to the intentions of the author. It doesn't care about the author. It doesn't want to pay attention to the emotions of the reader. It doesn't care about the reader. It doesn't care about you. It cares about just the text. Not what you think the text is about. What is the text about? That's what they're saying. Now, of course, very easy to argue against this. To say, what is the text about in an objective sense? Nothing, because different people can argue in different ways that a text is about different things. That is just true, right? That is just true. You can analyze it in different ways. So these fallacies and new criticism has fundamental flaws. But when you are writing about a theory, you can't just talk about why it's a problem. You need to actually talk about the theory itself. You need to understand where they were coming from. And when it came to new criticism, they wanted to establish literature as a science. So that means that basically you need rules like these. These are rules. The fallacies of new criticism could also be called the rules of new criticism. It's saying no intention, no emotion, only read the text in its actual form. So you see, they all make sense within new criticism, and that is what these three fallacies are. So yeah, hopefully that has been helpful. If it has been helpful, do the usual YouTube things which I spoke about earlier. Also, if you appreciate the things I do on this channel, and there are a whole bunch of other videos, there's things about like other videos about new criticism, videos about Russian formalism, also going into the later stuff like semiotics, Umberto Eco's semiotics, de Saussure's semiotics, all sorts of later literary theory stuff if you are getting into this sort of stuff. So if you appreciate this kind of stuffs, you can check out some of my books if you'd like. I'm just going to talk about Fleshstone Blues, which is my latest novel. Basically, cyberpunk, a detective story, but the detective is not a cop. Don't worry. The detective is instead a criminal who's trying to figure out what happened to his partner in crime, who has been deleted, because people in this world have digital selves, and you're not supposed to be able to be deleted. So how was he deleted? You can check it out in the description below. And other than that, I hope that you have a great day, week, and month ahead, and a goodbye.